Honestly, I'd love to see you try to beat New Lumos in the other island. I think it's doable, not gonna lie. Is it possible to beat the Tower of Dread without buying new gear? What about no gear and no grub? There is a post-game. It includes 2 new worlds. One is tropical themed and one is cyberpunk themed. Don't use the horse. You should try it sometime on the channel. I hear you. Hello Luiginoids, this is LuigiXRules getting right back into another challenge video. Today we are going to find out if it is possible to beat Miitopia's postgame with just our starting gear. Now, before we get into the rules, I just wanted to thank everyone for the overwhelmingly positive feedback on the last video. I don't know why this video of all my videos did so well, but I'm glad to do more things like it if that's what you want. Okay, enough of that. Let's get into the rules. Now, you'd think the rules would be the same as last time, but we all agreed that the last challenge was too easy. So, in addition to banning new gear from the inn, chests, roulette, and traveler's hub, we're also banning the horse and grub. The horse is easy. We can just choose to not bring him along. Sorry, Darkrai. As for grub, we can't exactly take away the bonuses that we already got, so the best we can do is not consume any more grub. In addition, before we start the challenge, we should go over what exactly beating the post-game entails. To me, beating the post-game constitutes defeating the final enemy in Galados Island and completing the Towers of Dread and Despair in New Lumos. To do that, we first have to, okay, technically we don't have to, but I'm going to, defeat the bosses at the end of each of the 8 districts. On top of these bosses, I'm also going to be covering any optional bosses that were uniquely challenging, i.e. a unique status or gimmick. Lastly, before we get into the challenge, I'd like to remind everyone to like the video and subscribe to the channel. I'm not usually one to beg like this, but this is what all of the other YouTubers do, so I guess that's what I have to do too. And come on, look at this chart. Have you seen a subscriber ratio this skewed before? Ugh, sorry about that. Let's just get to the video. Before we get started, however, we should go over our team composition. Unlike with the Darkest Lord, in the post-game there is no reason to not just use the same 4 party members in every major battle. Well, I guess except for Mii's becoming sick, which your Mii can become now, by the way. It's very annoying. Anyway, because of this, we can just pick out our 4 strongest members and use them for the entire run. I've already gone over how useful a lot of these jobs are in my previous video, so I won't go in depth here, but there are some useful skills that our Miis will learn as they get to higher and higher levels. I'll go over those when we get to them. Anyway, I chose myself as the cat for a strong physical attacker, Jesus the mage for a strong magic attacker, Zelda the cleric for her wonderful healing ability, and Eevee the princess for her support, and, as we'll later see, surprisingly strong attack potential. When we open the game again, we can see that there's actually someone who wants to go to Galados Isle, so I guess we'll be starting there. When we get into our first beachy battle, it is immediately apparent just how useful Darkrai was in battle. Without him, battles become significantly longer and more tedious. You'll definitely have to be careful with your sprinkles in order to survive here. It isn't long before we encounter our first optional boss, Wario Alien. He's like the aliens from the other world in that he can make your Miis old and therefore deal less damage. This is actually a blessing in disguise as it provides the perfect opportunity to heal up in the safe spot, and means that he doesn't attack us for surprisingly big damage. I hate to start this up again, but yeah, you've got to be diligent with your sprinkles lest you let your reviver die. This fight is definitely not the hardest thing in the world, but it's a good example that this is going to be difficult. After some more exploring of and getting bodied in Galados, I decide to be done for the day. When I pick up the game again, I'm blessed with the request I've been looking for. The one that takes you to a unique area of Peculia, Manor Macabre. Joining our party on this quest is Palutena, of whom I can't seem to recognize the job of. Anyway, I decided to head straight for the boss of this temporary area, the Pop-Up Puppet. Sadly, I was sick during this excursion, so ToadRules had to fill in as a physical attacker. While we were in Galados, Jesus learned Barrier, a fantastic move that halves all incoming damage. Unfortunately, it seems that he can only use it on himself. Oh well, he's probably the one that needed it the most. As for the puppet itself, it didn't really pose a threat, as the quest was only level 19, and we're quite a bit above that level. It can disable your Miis for a turn and hits ToadRules fairly hard with its multi-hit attack, but overall, this was pretty easy. After we finish the fight, Palutena gives us the Bat Charm. When we get back to the inn, this somehow allows us to unlock the Vampire as a job. As you may have guessed from the fact that it's an unlockable job, the Vampire is pretty darn good. It can randomly revive with 1 HP, allow others to do the same, and deals damage to enemies that directly attack it. Its attacks also have an interesting property where they use his magic stat, but the enemy's defense stats, to determine how much damage they deal. This is most noticeable when fighting fiends, who only take 1 damage for magic attacks. I immediately turned Jesus into a vampire, as I don't think the mage is going to be too useful in the future. Yeah, the mage is our strongest attacker, but it also uses a ton of MP. That, coupled with the fact that it takes a lot of damage, means that its longevity is not going to be so great for the final challenges we have to face. Now, Jesus is going to start back at level 1, so we'll essentially be running with only 3 party members until he catches up. Nevertheless, I have a feeling that this is going to be crucial for the endgame of this challenge. After another day goes by, we get a request to go to another new part of an old area, Chili Peak of the Powdered Peaks. Unlike other optional areas, this one has parts of it that don't go away after completing the mission, so that's interesting. We have a pop star joining us, which is actually kind of bad, as he will use way out of tune a lot, causing us to take a not small amount of damage. Also, along the way, I decided to change Zelda's personality from stubborn to energetic. This was because her refusal to accept help may actually harm us for reasons we'll be seeing later, and because our reviver having the chance to survive on 1 HP sounded pretty useful to me. Anyway, one of the main reasons I brought this up is that we fight Koro-sensei Wind here. Other than hitting like a freight train, like a ton of enemies do these days, he can also blow away your party members, temporarily removing them from the battle. This doesn't seem so bad, as he only gets 2 attacks per turn, unlike the previous 2 bosses covered, which each got 3. However, Miis can be gone for several turns in a row, which gives him the chance to remove multiple Miis from the battle at once. And if he kills all of your remaining Miis while some are blown away, that counts as losing the battle. So essentially, this fight is on a soft time limit. Luckily, that time limit is made easier to get past thanks to Jesus causing the tornado to take damage every time it hits him. His frailty may be a blessing in disguise. As for strategy, when I only had 2 Miis left, as was the case for most of the battle, I focused on keeping my Miis healthy with a safe spot and sprinkles. Other than that, there wasn't much I could do except hope that Eevee decides to use her 100 damage double royal wave instead of her 6 damage basic attack. That's how I won, by the way, just hoping that the right people got blown away and that we could deal enough damage so the tornado would go down before we did. Around this time, I realized that we were struggling heavily in Galados, so we would probably need to come back later. This was made extra clear when I got a mission that included a bunch of enemies that I knew were in New Lumos, and we could handle them at least okay. So I decided to trek on to New Lumos. This turned out to be a mistake, however, as we quickly ran into this level that had like 5 battles in a row with pretty powerful enemies. So after grinding a few levels, I went back to Galados, and while we got a little farther, we were quickly shut down by the clever running noses that easily one-shot my Miis with their sneezing attacks. So after more grinding, I'm finally able to crack the brutal level in District 1 and fight the first boss of New Lumos, the King Cow. As a boss that is essentially a reprise of a previous boss, the King Cow sets the precedent for most of the bosses we'll fight in New Lumos. Anyway, since this one's based on the Minotaur, it either hits 1 Mii for huge damage or all Miis for not as huge but still a little dangerous damage. Looking back at the footage for this fight, yuck. I have clearly developed a better strategy since then, as I would routinely let Mii stay outside of the safe spot where they had basically no HP, so we burned through HP bananas fast. In fact, because of this, Jesus made Zelda mad at him, so she didn't heal him as well. It seems like I was banking too much on Zelda being a good healer, as I would constantly leave several low HP Miis out, prompting Zelda to use Panacea instead of Giga Cure, which doesn't really heal any HP at all. Luckily, at this point, Zelda had Giga Resurrection, which is the only guaranteed revive in the game, so as long as she stayed alive, we could struggle through this awful attempt at a fight. We won though, so that's what counts. Before the next New Lumos boss, I wanted to talk about the final portion of a previous area that's only available in the post-game, the Sinister Plant of Nimbus. This is the perfect place to talk about the cat's final ability, Feline Frenzy. This ability hits every enemy for not too small damage, especially after sharpened claws. It's a good thing too, because Double Scratch really hasn't been cutting it lately. Sadly, while the MP cost may not seem too high, keep in mind that the cat has one of the lowest MP stats in the game, so you burn through it really quickly with repeated Feline Frenzy usages. Other than HP, MP seems to be the stat most hindered by us not continuing to eat food. Good thing I had already boosted those up before we banned grub. Anyway, while we're here, we may as well talk about the boss I had to fight, the Red Dragon. This thing is really annoying because it has a rather hard-hitting, all-hitting attack that it likes to spam twice in a row before you can even react to it. In fact, I can two-shot or nearly two-shot all my Miis, so this battle consists of constantly putting Miis in the safe spot to heal up. I would have used Sprinkles, but despite my earlier complaining, we actually still have a decent amount of HP, so we run out of HP Sprinkles pretty quickly. Anyway, because we died to just a few hits, our Miis die a lot in this fight. Good thing we have Zelda with her guaranteed revive, and Jesus who can revive automatically. Even with these boons, we were still on the brink of losing several times throughout the battle. Eventually we managed to win, but this was easily the toughest battle thus far. Let's hope that didn't set a precedent for the rest of the bosses in this run. Okay, we're almost at the next New Lumos boss, but before then I actually decided to make a change to our party. You see, when members of my team got sick, I would sometimes bring Dr. Eggman along because I recalled that the imp was actually a pretty good job because of its bulk. Despite this, I was surprised to find out that he's able to survive just about as well as the rest of our team, even with being a significantly lower level. This, combined with me getting mad at Jesus for constantly using Bite, which is a move that heals HP equal to the damage they deal, but it uses their physical attack, so even with gear it's useless, instead of the far superior Bat Tornado, led to me replacing him with Dr. Eggman. Welcome back to the team. Dr. Eggman gets the chance to prove himself with the boss of District 2 of New Lumos, the Calc King. This is one of two bosses, and arguably the only one, in New Lumos that isn't based on a previous boss. Like most bosses, he can hit one Mii hard or hit all Miis not quite as hard, but he's a lot less dangerous because he only gets one attack per turn. In fact, he often uses that one turn to summon annoying ultimate robot warriors. These guys can really rack up damage fast, especially if you were stupid like me and refused to use shield sprinkles to avoid their laser attacks. On the bright side, defeating them provides the perfect opportunity to become praised. As for strategy on my side, it wasn't very good. As I literally just said, for some reason I refused to use shield sprinkles to avoid the laser attacks, and often even allowed both targeted Miis to tank them. On top of that, I was careless and allowed Zelda to die early on. Thank goodness Resurgence triggered when I carelessly allowed myself to die, or that probably would have been it. Anyway, most of the damage dealt during this fight was by myself using Feline Frenzy while praised, and often while the Calc King was distracted by Sweet Whispers. Zelda also got to deal some damage with her new Aura attack. This fight, like many others, took a while, but honestly I think that's because of how reckless I was during it. Hopefully I can get my act together before too long. For once, nothing of note happened in between bosses, so let's dive straight into the boss of New Lumos' 3rd district, the Frog King and Queen. These two each attack twice per turn, and their splash attack can rack up damage pretty quickly. But there's one major flaw that makes this fight actually pretty easy: their bad breath attack. Yeah, it does good damage to all of our Miis, but 1, Zelda has Giga Panacea now, so she can heal everyone for quite a lot of HP, and 2, it takes 2 turns of charging up before they actually unleash the attack. So whenever they breathe in air, it's essentially just a waste of an attack. This fight is also the first one where I start to actually pay more attention and move Miis into the safe spot in order to recover. See, I'm trying to practice for the Tower of Dread, where we'd preferably not use any HP sprinkles or bananas until the final fight. So the safe spot provides an excellent source of healing. In fact, it's a full heal for all of my Miis, so any turn spent consuming an HP banana instead of in the safe spot is basically a turn wasted. Anyway, the frogs go down pretty easily, especially thanks to Dr. Eggman's Sweet Whispers and Eevee's Eau de Cologne weakening their defenses. The next time we stopped at the end, the roulette of the arcade finally had what I was looking for: the highest chance of a royal portion of EXP. This is what I've been saving all of my arcade tickets for. After catching Dr. Eggman up to the rest of the party, though, I remembered that this is best suited for getting the final levels, when the royal portion gives you the maximum of 99,999 experience. So I decided to wait a little longer before truly grinding the roulette. After doing a favor that involved fighting a lot of Galados Isle enemies, I decided to try another push for the boss of Galados. This time the clever running noses still do stupid amounts of damage, but at least they don't one-shot my Miis anymore. One of the main reasons I've held back on trying Galados again was the fear of having to 100% clear all of the levels. After a couple of battles, though, I decided that the somewhat meager amount of experience I gained from defeating the noses was not worth having to fight them, so for once I decided to forego completing every single path of every level. This didn't help with the ones before the boss, though, as they forced us to fight the Red Dragon again, this time after some annoying Purple Wolf of the Wisps, and the new Red Orochi. The Red Dragon still deals ludicrous amounts of damage with his breath attack, so diligency with sprinkles is still a requirement. The same goes for the Red Orochi, who's basically the same as the Red Dragon, but it deals more damage, only it was after not just one, but multiple enemy encounters. Despite these surprises, I was able to defeat them each on my first try, and so we're finally at the big boss of Galados Isle, the Replica, that's a hard word to say. The Replica Dark Lord. As the name implies, this is basically a rematch against the Dark Lord, only he's a lot stronger and can't steal your Mii's faces and put them on imps. He takes almost no damage from physical attacks, so I, as the cat, actually took up more of a support role, using playful antics to restore my companion's MP. On top of that, unlike the Red Dragon and Red Orochi, his single hit attack is actually the more dangerous of his attacks because his multi-hit attack honestly isn't that bad. He can also try to lull Mii's into a nightmare, but that's not a problem when Eevee decides to block almost all attempts. Also, since Dr. Eggman's caught up in the level department, he can now use Wicked Pitchforks, which deals pretty good damage at the cost of a lot of his MP. I never realized how low of an MP stat the imp had. Anyway, with some patience and lots of safe spot healing, the Replica Dark Lord is defeated, and we've completed one of our main objectives, clearing Galados. There was a reason I wanted to rush to complete Galados. After defeating the Dark Lord Replica, we got the Elven Charm. This doohickey unlocks one of the best jobs in the game, the Elf. While slow, this thing has monstrous support potential. As we've seen with Warning, the youngest Fab Fairy, the Elf can use Dancing Arrow, which forces the targeted enemy to dance. This means that you can essentially infinitely stunlock enemies if you keep using Dancing Arrow on them. Of course, this doesn't work on bosses, but when you're pit against Terror Fiend after Terror Fiend and new Lumos, it can certainly help. The Elf also has arguably the single best skill in the game, Forest Aegis. Remember when I talked about the Mage's Barrier ability? Well, imagine that, but you can use it on other Miis as well. This means that with a bit of setup, you can make all enemies and even bosses significantly more manageable. As you could probably tell by now, I decided to make myself the Elf. While this means that we won't have a physical attacker anymore and don't have access to the amazing Feline Frenzy, I think it's worth it to have all damage and stunlock any enemy you choose. Now, the Elf only starts at level 1, so we'll have to wait until it unlocks its true potential. Still, having utility this awesome is going to help a ton. The greatness of the Elf can easily be seen in the boss of New Lumos' 4th district, the Dragon Lord. As you may have guessed, this boss is akin to the Red Dragon, although I find that it's significantly weaker. I wonder if I was underleveled while fighting the Red Dragon. In any case, after a couple of turns, we're able to set up all 4 Forest Aegises, so the Dragon Lord really isn't dealing much damage, except to me, who is at a significantly lower level. Now, the damage adds up over time, so we do still have to spend every couple of turns in the safe spot, but we were never in danger of dying. As for strategy, I neglected to mention that the Elf actually has a decent attack stat, so after the Forest Aegises are set up, I can be the Hyper Sprinkle user. Overall, this fight was pretty darn easy. That gives me hope that the towers won't be too bad. District 5 is next, and here we have to fight tons of difficult enemies. Between the Terror Fiends, Clever Running Noses, and new Iron Generals, I decided that the enemies were just too difficult and didn't give enough experience to warrant completing every path of every stage. So, just like in Galados, from here on out I'm going against my inner completionist and rushing to the bosses. Let's hope that doesn't lead to us being underleveled. Anyway, it's time to take on the boss of District 5, the King of Hounds. This beast can attack 3 times each turn and can either hit one Mii for not insignificant damage, hit a Mii and the ones next to it for decent damage, or hit all Miis for a little less damage. Of course, this is all hampered significantly by Forest Aegis. Oh yeah, he can also put Miis into a nightmare-fueled sleep, but 1, Eevee can just block it with Blindfold, and 2, it likes to attack the Miis that it just put to sleep. Even if the Mii stays asleep, we can just heal it off in the safe spot. As for attacking strategies, I recently unlocked Hail of Arrows, which deals a crazy amount of damage to all foes, especially after being boosted by Show Off 3. What's funny is that the Elf actually has a relatively pitiful magic stat for having some magic attacks, so they decided to crank up the base power of this move by a lot. Works for us! Overall, the King of Hounds is fairly easy, just be sure to heal up in the safe spot whenever your Miis are low on HP. Let's continue this boss rush with the ones in District 6, the Dark King and Queen. What's with all the kings in New Lumos? Anyway, this fight consists of another variation of the Dark Lord, which I've already covered when talking about its replica, so just assume everything I said then applies here. What makes this fight interesting is the addition of the Dark Queen. Just like the Dark King, she can either hit one Mii or every Mii, each attack dealing good damage. What makes her special is her ability to make Miis evil. Evil is the worst status in the game, as it makes you forfeit your turn, prevents others from taking their turns, and makes them mad at you. Thank goodness it doesn't always work and that it can be blocked by Eevee's Blindfold. Seriously, that skill really comes in handy. Anyway, like always, I prioritize giving Forest Aegises to everyone before wailing on the opposition with Hail of Arrows, which, like I said before, hits all enemies, so it's even more useful than Double Royal Wave against multiple bosses. Of course, Eevee also has Ultimate Royal Wave now, which also hits all enemies for huge damage, but she seems to prefer Double Royal Wave. In any case, after the Forest Aegises are set up, this fight's pretty much over. Just put your Miis in the safe spot when they need to be healed and continue dishing out damage. But the fun doesn't stop there. We still got to fight the boss of the 7th district, the Evil Sage. Besides the Calc King, the Evil Sage is the only New Lumos boss that isn't based on a previous boss, and even that's debatable. Its attacks are similar to the right hand of the Darker Lord in that it has a single hit lightning attack and a lock-on Tower of Flame attack, in addition to a massively damage all-hitting explosion. Personally, I think that this fight is different enough from the right hand to not be considered a ripoff, and is instead what a Darker Lord fight could have been like. Anyway, as I mentioned, the Evil Sage really packs a punch, especially when it catches you off guard by locking on and attacking in the same turn. So please, be wary of that. Before you get your Forest Aegises up, you might want to use your Shield Sprinkles to block the flame attacks. Even with Forest Aegis though, many Miis are only able to survive it when at full HP, so this boss isn't playing around. Its explosion also still deals massive damage through Forest Aegis. As always, be wary about your Mii's HP, and don't be afraid to spend everyone's turn in the safe spot if needed. Actually, other than the lock-on awareness, there really isn't much different to say compared to the other fights. Just pay attention and the Evil Sage will eventually go down. And finally, the boss of the 8th district, the Dark Sun. As you may have guessed, this boss is based on the Darkest Lord, the final boss of the main game. Just like with the Evil Sage, even when Forest Aegises are set up, the Dark Sun deals a lot of damage. Luckily, he also likes to summon metals, which aren't a big deal with 4 stages up. Also, now would probably be a good time to mention Counter Arrow, which is an elf skill that can block incoming physical damage targeted at other Miis. While it can't trigger for the Dark Sun, it can trigger for the metals, making them even less of a threat. In fact, the metals are often just a way for our Miis to get praised. Getting back to the Sun itself, in addition to summoning the metals, it can, of course, target one Mii for huge damage, target all Miis for huge damage, or give them nightmares. They really loved the nightmare status, didn't they? Anyway, this boss can be countered just like every other boss, except even more turns are spent in the safe spot because of how damaging it is. Of course, being based on the final boss, this fight has 2 phases. Once you get the Dark Sun to about 3/10 HP, it will use the set everyone to 1 HP attack that the Darkest Lord was known for. After it uses it once, it will use it about every 4 turns, so you'll want to take it out quickly once it gets to this point. Luckily, if a Mii is in the safe spot during this attack, it actually avoids the attack, so be sure to put your Reviver in there when you think it's about to set everyone to 1 HP. I feel like it's hard to convey just how stressful this fight was with just a description of it. I mean, this thing took over 20 minutes to beat. In the end, I beat it, but there were some close calls towards the end there. And with that, we are finally done with all of the new Lumos bosses. That means there's only one thing left to do, to take on the Towers of Dread and Despair. Before then, I decided it was finally time to grind to the max level of 50. Thankfully, after only a couple of in-visits, the roulette had the maximum chance of a royal portion of experience, so I was finally able to use all of those tickets I've been hoarding the whole game. This made the grind significantly easier. Now that we're at the max level, let's have a look at our stats. As you can see, some Miis are definitely tankier than others, and there are still lots of stats that can be gained from Grub. Most notably, I finally outspeed Dr. Eggman, although I'm not sure if it's enough to outspeed any of these final enemies. You may have also noticed that Eevee was changed to be cautious. This was because I realized that an airheaded Mii can't play with most of the enemies in either tower, so the best part of the personality is gone. As for why I chose cautious specifically, this was because I figured potentially doubling the princess's surprisingly hard-hitting attack's power would be pretty useful. Now, sadly, this does mean that Eevee will go after enemies she was already faster than, meaning she may take damage and have to heal in the safe spot when she could have just gotten an attack off, but I figured that the double damage was worth the risk. Finally, here's some proof that I've never obtained any new weapons or armor for any of our Miis. You'll see that I have some other pieces of gear, but those are from my other jobs as a cat thief and pop star. Anyway, with all of this prep out of the way, let's begin the Tower of Dread. The Tower of Dread consists of all 8 bosses from the districts of New Lumos, in order by district number. The catch is, we have to fight them all in a row without healing at the end or replenishing any sprinkles or HP bananas. This is why it was so crucial that we stopped relying on sprinkles for healing. As I've shown, the safe spot is an excellent alternative healing source that restores HP and MP at the same time. This healing can be furthered by the Get Well Soon relationship ability. Speaking of those, you might have noticed that I didn't get all of my Miis up to the maximum relationship level with each other. This is because if 2 Mii's relationship level goes up in a battle, they both get fully healed. With our limited healing options, I figured that this would be more beneficial than leaving everyone at max relationship level and wasting these free heals. By now, you're probably wondering why I'm showing footage of various bosses and not talking about them individually. That's because I've already shown myself beating them at lower levels, and they're most certainly beatable 10 plus levels higher. The difficulty, of course, comes from the fact that nothing is restored at the end of each battle. This means that the end of every boss, except for the Dark Sun at the top, is spent trying to get our Miis into a position where they're fully healed, both HP and MP, and the boss is about to die. Also, Forest Aegis is reset after every boss, so the beginning of each fight is spent setting those up while trying to survive. I'd recommend saving your shield sprinkles for the Evil Sage, as it can deal immense damage to the one Mii that isn't in the safe spot before Forest Aegis is set up. In total, this ordeal took over an hour to complete, but that's mostly because I was playing very conservatively. I feel bad not talking about this more in depth, but really I've covered pretty much everything before, so I guess we can just skip to the end where I defeat the Dark Sun and collect a gold medal. If we were playing the 3DS version, then we'd be done there. However, this is the Switch version, where they decided that the Tower of Dread wasn't hard enough and added the new Tower of Despair. This tower functions similarly to the Tower of Dread in that there are 8 separate battles that you have to get through without healing or resetting sprinkles in between. However, unlike the Tower of Dread, each floor consists of bosses not found anywhere else in the game. So I actually have something to say about each individual boss. First, though, I should mention that all of the strategies that apply to the Tower of Dread apply here, although it can be especially annoying to find an opportunity where everyone's healed up. Without further delay, let's start the final ascent up the Tower of Despair. On the first floor, we have to face off against 6 elite goblins, and already we can see that this is not going to be easy. Each of our Miis can only take 2 hits from each goblin before going down, even less if they just randomly decide to deal double damage. This makes setting up 4 stages even more crucial than ever before. Luckily, we have some saving graces. For one, they can sometimes tease instead of attacking, which Eevee can block, and even if she doesn't, after 4 stages are set up, it's not like Anger is that bad of a status anyway. It allows the Mii to attack twice each turn, with the drawbacks that they can only use attacking skills and can't be controlled when the Mii you're controlling is mad. This can be bad if the healer gets mad, but honestly, unless they need the healing anyway, it's mostly not worth getting rid of Anger. Anyway, our other saving grace is that the Goblins' attacks are all physical and contact-based, meaning that we can dodge them with both Escort and Counter Arrow. In addition, Hail of Arrows is extra effective here since it hits all enemies for its crazy amount of damage. That being said, before 4 stages are set up and some of the Goblins are defeated, this fight is very stressful. It was a real struggle trying to keep myself alive so that I could set up 4 stages on everyone. Thankfully I ended up succeeding and we got through the first floor. This does not bode well for the rest of the tower. On the second floor, we have to fight the Heavy Golem. He deals ludicrous damage to one Mii and decent damage to Miis around it, so you'll probably want to keep one of your middle Miis in the safe spot to avoid spread damage. Luckily, he only attacks twice and can be stopped by counter arrows, so once 4 stages are set up, the damage he deals is manageable. Now, sadly, he has monstrous defense, so when Eevee for some reason chooses to do a regular attack instead of double Royal Wave, it does even less damage than normal. In the end, though, the Heavy Golem ended up being a lot more manageable than the Elite Goblins. On to the next challenge. Floor 3 contains 3 Neon Pharaohs. If you remember from the Pharaoh bosses from the previous video, that means 3 of our Miis will become Pharaohs and give them HP bananas if you're not careful enough. Because of this, it is crucial that you remember everyone's turn order so that you put them in the safe spot and get rid of their Pharaohness. If you have any cautious Miis, it's also important to realize that them becoming a Pharaoh replaces them getting ready, and so their turn will essentially be skipped if they decide to wait until the end of the turn. Speaking of which, I was surprised to find that everyone, including Dr. Eggman, was faster than the Pharaohs. This made setting up the 4 stages a little easier, which is especially good when you consider that every other turn, the Pharaohs will instead attack a Mii and those beside it for decent damage. So, just like with the Heavy Golem, you might want to consider leaving a middle Mii in the safe spot during their turns. Once again, they are susceptible to cool dodging and counter arrow and the like, and don't hurt too much after 4 stages are set up, so these turns are pretty manageable. Also, if you don't want a specific Mii getting turned into a Pharaoh, you can always stick them in the safe spot during their turns so that the Neon Pharaohs can target all of the other Miis instead of the one you want to be safe. Really, this fight isn't all that hard, just annoying with the even more than usual safe spot management. And that's saying something because using the safe spot is a pretty important part of our strategy. Once we finally get past the Neon Pharaohs, we can move on to the Colossal Serpent on the 4th floor. I've been fighting Orochis like this throughout the game and even briefly mentioned the Red Orochi earlier, but I guess now's a good time to go over it in depth. Although there's really not much to be said that wasn't said about other bosses. It has a physical attack that can be countered like the ones of the previous Tower of Despair bosses, and a supremely dangerous all-hitting attack that can be circumvented by leaving a Mii in the safe spot and with 4 stages. Really, the scariest part of it is that it gets 3 attacks per turn, but as always, after all 4 stages are set up, the damage is pretty manageable. There were still some close calls, but overall the Colossal Serpent is not that big of a deal. The 5th floor of the Tower of Despair contains 4 gourmet burgers, and let me tell you, this one's a doozy. If you remember from the previous video, burgers can eat Miis, preventing them from attacking or using any skills. As you could imagine, when the number of burgers is the same as the number of Miis, that becomes an issue, especially since they make setting up 4 stages a lot more difficult. Thankfully, our Miis only miss 1 turn due to being eaten, but that still means this fight is going to take even longer than usual. The major problem is that they can leave you with only 1 Mii on the field, meaning all of the burgers will attack that Mii, and even with 4 stages, that damage racks up fast. Also, when there's only 1 Mii on the field, you can't use the safe spot, so that recovery option is gone. I was super close to dying at one point, so I decided that it was finally time to use some sprinkles. I would have preferred to keep them for longer, but then again, I guess using them is better than saving them for all 8 fights and wasting 999 free HP. After some time, I'm finally able to set up all 4 stages, but as I mentioned earlier, the fight's still difficult even with them up. Eventually I was able to kill one of them, and the others were on low HP thanks to Hail of Arrows hitting all of them. Afterwards, the fight became significantly easier, as I didn't have to worry about tanking as many hits or as many Miis being eaten. The fight ended soon after, but man, this was easily the hardest battle so far, and we're not even close to the top yet. If you thought the gourmet burgers were bad, then oh boy, you're not ready for the floor that I was actually afraid of. Floor 6 consists of 2 blue goddesses and a red fiend. You heard me right, this fight contains an enemy that can instantly kill any Mii it wants to. To be sure myself and Zelda stayed safe, I decided to use shield sprinkles during this fight. However, I was surprised to learn that Zelda's actually faster than the Red Fiend, which means she could have ended our suffering very quickly. See, most of the enemies in the Tower of Despair are treated like bosses, which means they are unaffected by things like Dancing Arrow and insta-kill moves. However, the developers must have realized that the Red Fiend was a crazy ordeal to take down, because it is actually susceptible to these things. And luckily, it seems like Zelda's AI realizes that the Red Fiend is the greatest threat and needs to neutralize it at all costs, because she spams Righteous Anger until she instantly kills the Red Fiend. I was super worried that I was going to have to spam Dancing Arrow instead of setting up the Forced Aegises, but thankfully Zelda made sure that that wasn't necessary. So I was able to set them up without too big of a deal. Oh yeah, and as for the Blue Goddesses, they act just like the Evil Queen from New Lumos, so they use crazy hard all-hitting attacks and try to make our Miis evil. I was super worried about having to deal with this on top of the Red Fiend, so that's another reason that it's good we took it out early. Really, after the Red Fiend is gone, we can go back to whittling away at the Blue Goddesses while staying healthy in the safe spot, like always. And like always, we end up winning. The floor I was most worried about is done, but that doesn't mean we're out of the woods yet. We've still got 2 more floors to go, starting with Floor 7, which contains the Light Sage and the Light Lord. As you may have guessed from their appearances, these are reincarnations of the Evil Sage and Evil King from New Lumos, with all of the same attacks, just amplified. And of course, we've never had to fight them at the same time, so there's that. Anyway, it should not be underestimated just how much damage these guys can deal. I really lucked out that they only used their basic attacks first, otherwise setting up Forced Aegises would not have been fun. Anyway, the Light Sage is the bigger threat here, as its lock-on and explosion attacks are still very devastating. That's not to say that the Light Lord isn't devastating, he's just more manageable than the Light Sage. It helps that he often does blockable physical attacks while the Light Sage doesn't. Still, between the two of them, we take a lot of damage every turn, so once again the safe spot is crucial. The big difference between this fight and those before it really is that they both have a ton of HP, so this fight takes a while. With patience and observation, it can be conquered, and we can move on to the final fight in all of Miitopia. On the rooftop of the Tower of Despair, we face this ultimate boss, the Boss Snurf. This thing is actually so fast that it outspeeds Eevee, and sometimes even Zelda. It attacks one Mii and those beside it for big damage, but once again, Forced Aegis makes that more manageable. This boss really isn't too remarkable until you get it down to 2/3 HP, where it enters Phase 2. In Phase 2, the Boss Snurf will sometimes summon Juvenile Snurfs instead of attacking. These little buggers will lock onto one Mii and, a turn later, bring them down to 1 HP and remove Forced Aegis. You can avoid this attack by putting the targeted Mii in the safe spot, but sadly, the order that the 2 Juvenile Snurfs lock on is not always the order they attack in. So you've basically just got to make a 50-50 guess and hope that you're right. Either way, at least only one Mii will get reduced to 1 HP. Anyway, their removal of Forced Aegis also means that I have to set another one up, which means I'm not using my OP Hail of Arrows attack. This, on top of the Boss Snurf's attacks, makes for a tedious and slow battle. Oh, but we're not done yet. Once you get it down to 1/3 HP, it enters Phase 3. In Phase 3, the Boss Snurf can now give random statuses to every Mii and attacks 3 times instead of 2. Thankfully, Eevee can use Blindfold to block the random status on at least one Mii, but that's still a couple of Miis potentially neutered every time it uses this attack. Oh yeah, there's also an attack where it uses the status move, summons Juvenile Snurfs, and does a regular attack, and it all counts as one move. Luckily, the statuses aren't too big of a deal with a safe spot open, but it's still rather annoying. Thanks to Dr. Eggman's Sweet Whispers, which I feel I haven't given the proper praise as it speeds up these fights significantly, we were able to deal pretty good damage and eventually take it down, but man, that took a while. Once again, I feel that all I've said doesn't do justice to the amount of time this fight actually took. If you're curious, this one battle took 37 minutes. On top of the rest of the Tower of Despair, the whole ordeal took about 1 hour and 45 minutes. But in the end, on my first attempt, I actually managed to beat all of the bosses in the Tower of Despair, including the Boss Snurf, which means we have officially completed the run. So, is it possible to beat Miitopia's postgame without buying new gear? Yes, it is. I was getting worried towards the beginning about the possibility of this challenge, but even so, it proved to be easily doable. Of course, that was back when I was playing awfully, so there's that. Anyway, this challenge ended up being quite a bit of fun, exploring the ups and downs of different personalities and jobs. It does get rather tedious, and without the roulette, grinding would have been a pain, but in the end, I do think everyone should give this challenge a try. If anything, it would be good to have more people play this wonderful game that is Miitopia. I hope you liked the video. Once again, I hope you consider leaving a like and subscribing. I'm not quite sure what my next challenge video will be, or if I'll be able to get it out before I go off to college, but I think it may be related to one of those new Switch Online games. In the meantime, you should check out my challenge video where I tried to beat Bug Fables the Everlasting Sapling while only using B in combat. Until next time, I bid y'all goodbye!